Hey there, this is Teagarden with episode 70 of the Unveiled podcast. Thanks for joining me. So, for the past two episodes, I've been talking about essential ingredients for a healthy marriage. Time was the first one, spending undivided attention time together, and then God as an integral member of your relationship. And one more I wanted to talk about involves mutual submission. Now, notice I said mutual because I know submission is kind of a hot button. A lot of Christian marriages are out of balance because the church has been teaching wives submit to your husbands as if it means shut up and do what you're told. And I don't think this is what God had in mind. When we lived in San Jose, my stomach turned one day when I saw this family having a picnic at a Christian homeschool event. The father made all the children sit at the family table and not with their friends. Then he went on to criticize his wife very loudly and rudely that she hadn't followed his express instructions on how the lunches were to be made. His wife tried to explain why she had cut up the vegetables the way she did, to which he replied that he had instructed her differently. She then meekly apologized and hung her head, and this was in front of all of his children. His tone was very harsh, and he continued in this harsh tone as he talked with his children, and it literally broke my heart. I'm sure this woman thought she was being a good Christian wife by submitting to his every instruction. But that family was not the picture of health. All the other families were having fun, but not that family. Our theme verse for Synergy, a marriage mentoring this year, is Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And notice that it says one another. It's what I call mutual submission. The phrase one another is actually derived from the Greek word allelon, which means one another, each other, mutually, reciprocally. It implies balance, equal parts. There are actually 59 one another exhortations in the New Testament. Submit to one another, serve one another, love one another, wash one another's feet, accept one another, live in harmony with one another, and the list goes on. If you look at Jesus and the disciples' teachings, by and large, they reflect a whole lot of one anothering in all types of relationships. And marriage should be our priority relationship. So it's a great place to start. Why does God want us to submit to one another? Well, first, if one spouse is always submitting while the other spouse always dominates, it's eventually going to lead to resentment. It may seem to work for a while and it may seem easier because there's less fighting. One might think, just let him have his way. Or he says, just let her make the decisions. It's easier. And yes, the woman can be the dominant one. And this arrangement may bring temporary peace, but what really happens below the surface is resentment builds in the spouse that is always surrendering their rights and desires. And sometimes that person begins to live a double life where they do things that they're hiding, or they try to stay out of the other person's way as much as possible. It's not healthy. And then what happens to the dominant spouse? Well, they may feel superior and begin to disrespect their spouse and stop realizing the wonderful contribution that their spouse can make to the relationship. It may encourage them to dominate other people in other situations. And sadly, they miss out on sharing their partner's deepest feelings and desires and benefiting from their strengths and contributions. It's not working as a team. So I've mentioned the dangers of one spouse always being dominant and making unilateral decisions. How does submitting to one another work? Some people think, won't there be mass chaos? No, because both partners want a solution that works. And we often don't spend the time necessary to hear each other out and make a decision that we can both be happy with. And when we do take the time to find a mutually satisfying solution, it's a win-win-win because both spouses are happy in the end and the marriage wins as well. You may not get things initially the way you wanted them, but you should end up with a solution that you can be happy with. And sometimes it's even better than what you were initially thinking. God made each of us in a marriage unique, and we each bring our own skills and talents to the table. Like, I like to make decisions quickly and be done with them and move on. And my husband likes to research things and make sure he's making the best decision. But sometimes he doesn't get around to doing the research very quickly. So if I override him and say, I don't care what you think, I'm buying this anyway, then I've dominated him and he feels unheard. We also may find out in a week that that purchase wasn't a very good one. But if he puts his foot down and says, you can't buy it because I haven't researched it, then I feel overridden and frustrated that my goal or project is not happening. Neither example is mutual submission, but here's what mutual submission can look like. Grant acknowledges that I would like to make a purchase of a costly item. He asks questions to understand what my goal really is. And he acknowledges that I want to move on from this decision, but he offers his wisdom about what else might better satisfy that goal, or ask for, time to look at the review so we know whether or not this item will actually do what it says. And then I ask him to commit to looking into it in a certain time frame and help with the process as we go. And he tries to understand my need, I try to understand his need, and we try not to judge each other. And we usually find a product that meets our goal in a timely manner if we can both do that. Mutual submission can also look like caring for each other when you're sick, helping each other when one is overwhelmed. It can occasionally mean sacrificing your desires, but it's done out of love because you choose to. There's a difference between choosing to sacrifice for your spouse and being made to sacrifice. And that's an important distinction, because if you do it by choice, it's out of love. And if you do it because you have to, it leads to anger and frustration. And I think the main thing about mutual submission is that it leads to humility. Okay, I am not smarter than you, better than you. I don't have to demand my own way. I need you in order to experience the best out of life. And when we're vulnerable and open and transparent with each other, it's going to make for a much better relationship. Okay, it looks like forgiveness. Most people have a hard time with the word submitting because they think it means they're going to be a doormat. But that only happens when one is dominating all the time and the other is submitting. That's not what mutual submission looks like. So I encourage you this week to think about, am I submitting to my spouse? Am I dominating? If I'm the one who's always submitting, what should I do about that? You may need to get help if your spouse is not open to listening, to submitting to one another. And that's okay. Be the first one to apologize. Be the first one to serve. Be the first one to love and honor. Okay, listen to their point of view and weigh it. You don't have to be right all the time, right? That's part of submitting. It says to submit out of our reverence for Christ. So he's our example and he's our motivation. Lord, I pray for the marriages that are out of balance in this area of submission. And I just pray you would help all of us submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Show us how to do it, Lord. Change our mindsets that need to be changed and make us in alignment with yours. Amen. Have a great day and go in joy and peace.